Welcome to the peer review training session for research-based academic papers for the PanSIG Journal. We want to extend our sincere thanks to you for dedicating your time and your expertise to the peer review process. By participating in this process, you're contributing both to the advancement of knowledge in your field and helping to maintain credibility and integrity in academic scholarship. Peer review helps to ensure that published work meets the highest standards of quality, rigor, and relevance. You'll be evaluating research-based academic papers by focusing on their content and research quality. You'll use the provided review form, which consists of 7 main sections, each addressing a critical aspect of the paper. And you can see the form here on the screen. We'll get into this in much more detail later on. Your feedback plays a vital role in guiding authors towards improving their work, and your constructive comments help elevate the overall quality of the journal. Now, after completing this review form, we're going to ask you to please cross-check your feedback with a rubric to ensure that the feedback is specific, clear, and actionable. Now, the rubric also helps to maintain consistency in the review process, ensuring that all reviewers adhere to the same high standards of evaluation. So let's begin by actually examining the rubric. Now, you've received this in the files with the paper that you'll be reviewing. So if we take a look here at the different sections of the rubric, we have the first section that your comments reflect the scores that you've given to the sections of the paper that you've evaluated, that you've given concrete examples, that the feedback you give is actionable, that your feedback follows a logical progression, and that the tone is positive. So let's take a look first off at the comments. Now, we hope that all of the comments come into the preferred zone here. So let's focus on that. So the comments reflect rubric scores. So if you give a score of 2 points, the feedback might look like it was really helpful, how you followed up with some abstract concepts and you give examples of the concepts with concrete examples. Okay, and something acceptable would be, it seems that there are several ideas you're using that require citations, but you haven't given the author any concrete or specific information. And unacceptable would be that the review form sections with low scores or scores of 1 or 2 don't have any specific comments. So please avoid that. Always try to give comments that are reflective of the scores you've given out. Now, next, concrete examples. Let's make that a little bigger so you can see it. So a concrete example that would fall into the preferred zone would be something like connected to direct quotes used to support statements. And you have written in your method section, you wrote, and a direct quote, the data was then statistically analyzed, but you didn't write how. So you're asking the author to clarify this. Or in your methods section, the data was analyzed by, and you give an example of what they've included, and then clearly showed the reader how you did your analysis. Okay, so please try to keep concrete examples as apart from saying something like this was poorly written or this is excellent. Okay, those are unacceptable comments. Now, next, actionable feedback. So if we're looking at something here in the preferred zone, the problems are clearly specified, possible solutions are shared. Many language teachers will have difficulty understanding this idea. How about first defining what blank is, and you can give the example that the author has listed in their work, and describing how blank, blank, blank relates to language teaching, as opposed to a comment that simply says the writing needs to be improved. Okay, moving to the next section, logical progression. So please make sure that your specific comments are organized by section of the paper and grouped by type. So for example, in your introduction, the structure is clear, but the argument could be stronger. Okay, so you're following the logical progression of the paper. In the methodology section, the statistical analysis is unclear. Okay, as opposed to an unacceptable comment that would be like, I liked your discussion section, but the introduction was unclear. Obviously, the introduction comes before the discussion, so that is not in logical progression. And finally, the tone. Please try to keep your comments on telling the author how to improve their paper. Also, make sure that they are kind, compassionate. Don't demotivate the author. Remember, too, that many of the authors submitting to the PanSIG Journal are novice authors. So let's try to give as much positive, constructive criticism as possible. So a comment that would have a positive tone would be something to the effect of, this section would be stronger with clearer examples. You've done a good job laying the groundwork, so just a bit more clarity will make it excellent, as opposed to, this section is poorly written and confusing. Okay, so give some positive affirmations. Now, let's see here. We're going to actually use this rubric, the editorial team, to ensure that your comments fall within the acceptable to preferred zone. So please keep that in mind, and let's move on to the actual review form. So after you've completed that review, and you've confirmed that your evaluation mostly, if not completely, falls into the preferred columns, you'll send that back to us. Now, let's take a look at the blank review form. Okay, that's where you'll be writing your comments, and then we'll take a look at a completed review form with some examples. So this review form has 7 sections. Let's take a look at them up a little bit closer. Okay, and let's just take a look here. Avoid feedback on format, language, and style of the paper. Leave that to the editorial team. Your task is to check the content through the criteria shown below. So let's take a look. If the author has not achieved a section, give them a 1. If you found it somewhat achieved but can be improved, that gets a 2 score. And if they've fully achieved, give them a 3. Now, if you give them a 3, you don't necessarily have to write a comment on what can be improved. However, you could include a positive comment down below in the general comments section here. Feel free to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at the different sections. Now, first off, we have the rationale. And what are you evaluating here? Well, a rationale is in an academic paper, explains why a study or a project, let me make this a little bigger for you, why a study or a project is being conducted. And it provides the reasoning behind the research. It situates the work within a broader context, and it justifies its importance. So writing a solid rationale helps demonstrate the significance and relevance of the research to the academic community and the stakeholders. So the rationale should clearly explain why this article is relevant, also its novelty, and its contribution to the field. So let's take a look at some questions that you could ask yourself connected to the rationale. Would be something like, 1, does the paper effectively explain its purpose? 2, is the research addressing a gap or offering something new to the field? And 3, is the rationale for this research clear and coherently presented? Okay, now how could you possibly provide feedback to the rationale? Well, we'll take a look at some good examples. And let's move on to the filled out, the completed one, the example form, you could write something to the effect of, if you gave the author a number 2 for rationale, the author should further explain the higher test scores and why their findings differ from other institutions. Okay, another example of good feedback might be something like, the rationale does not clearly explain the study's significance. It would help to explain or to state the gap in existing research and how this study aims to address it. So that kind of comment might be geared towards a 1 of not achieved. Okay, let's move on next to originality. Oh, and by the way, a comment that would be unacceptable or poor would be something to the effect of the rationale is weak and needs improvement. Okay, and we're not giving any explicit or direct examples, so it's an unclear type of feedback. Next, B, originality. So what are we evaluating here? Well, that's the paper's contribution to the body of knowledge in the field. And some questions that you can ask yourself connected to originality would be, does the research introduce new ideas or approaches? Does it extend the body of knowledge in its area? And will this work inspire future research? So, for example, let's say the paper you're reading has a very original idea and you gave it 3. Then you're not required to write any feedback. But let's say you gave a 1 and you wrote, the paper doesn't seem original. Well, that would obviously not be very good feedback. An example of, let's say you gave the author a 2, you could say the paper presents known concepts, but doesn't clearly demonstrate how these findings build on previous research. So it would be beneficial to explain how your study introduces a new or novel perspective or approach to the topic. Okay, so let's move on to the third criteria, which is topic. And what are you evaluating here? Well, the topic's relevance to the journal and whether it aligns with a proper theoretical or conceptual framework. Some questions that you might want to ask yourself as connected to the topic are, is the topic timely? Is of interest to the journal's audience? And does the framework support the research enough? So let's see here. So as an example, the reviewer thought that this topic was relevant, timely, of interest, gave the author a 3, so didn't have to provide any feedback. But let's say the reviewer gave it a 2 or a 1. Some feedback might be, the topic's interesting, but could be more directly aligned with the journal's audience by highlighting its implications for language teaching professionals. So maybe consider linking the research outcomes more explicitly to teaching practices. Okay, and the next section of the topic has been described within a theoretical or conceptual framework. Okay, so here is the feedback. And let's move on to the next section, the research question or questions and the objectives. So what are we evaluating here? It's clarity and alignment of the research questions and objectives within the rationale. So some questions you can ask yourself when you're reading through that section is, are the research questions clearly stated? And are they aligned with the study's purpose? So you could, for example, a poor example of feedback might be the research questions are not clear or the research question is not clear. Good feedback examples. Let's say you gave the author a 1 or a 2. You could write something to the effect of, while the research objectives are stated, they could be better aligned with the rationale by clarifying how each objective addresses a gap in the literature. So you might have given the author a 2 with that type of feedback. Okay, moving on to section E, the literature review. So what are you evaluating in this section? It's the comprehensiveness, the adequacy of the literature review in actually supporting the research. And some questions you can ask yourself are, does the literature engage? Does the review engage with recent and relevant uh, research? Are the gaps in the literature identified? And is there enough support in the theoretical framework? Also, the timeliness. Okay, so here the research questions and objectives are clearly stated. The reviewer gave the author a 3 on that section. An example of poor feedback might be the literature review is too brief. Okay. Literature review. Let's see here. Oh, sorry about that. I just messed up. I was looking at the wrong one. So here in literature review, the reviewer gave a 1 for the first section. The paper provides a comprehensive and adequate review of relevant literature to support the framework to engage with others. And the comment was the author should include other sources, as one source is not enough to support a whole theoretical framework. Okay, here in the next section, the author used reliable sources. The reviewer gave it a 2, with feedback of the author should consider replacing the sources mentioned below with peer-reviewed journal articles or studies from reputable academic sources. Okay, and for the third section, the reviews, the literature used is timely. So usually I would say probably within the last 10 to 15 years. Not exclusively though, okay? So here the reviewer gave them a 3, so all was good there. However, if the author used mostly old information, old research, then you could comment, for example, the review lacks recent sources from the past 5 years. Using or incorporating more up-to-date studies will provide a stronger foundation for your research, and that might have, been a 2 or even a 1. Okay, let's move on to the next section, methodological accuracy. That's a mouthful. So, what are you evaluating here? Well, this is the appropriateness and detail of the research design and methods. So you're going to determine whether the methods chosen are appropriate for the research question or questions and objectives. So, for example, qualitative methods should align with more exploratory research. Qualitative methods are better suited for testing hypotheses. Ensure also that the methods of data collection and analysis fit the research context in question. Also, you might want to check that the procedures used for analyzing data are appropriate for the type of data that was collected. Okay, so let's take a look here. The reviewer gave 3s in both of these sections, so no comments were necessary. A 2 was received for the content of the paper, stats, figures, and its technical accuracy. Feedback being the author needs to clarify either the text or the figures on or in graph 2, and the final section for methodological accuracy and the analysis appropriately addresses the research questions and provides a meaningful interpretation of the data. The author got a 2, and the comment was each figure should be explained in more detail, highlighting the relevant points of the results. Okay, now moving on. Let's see here. All right, so significance of findings. So what are we evaluating here? Well, we're looking as to whether the findings are logically connected to the data and offer meaningful contributions. Okay, and some questions that we might want to ask for this section are, do the results answer the research questions? Do they prove the proposed hypothesis? So here we have conclusions flow forth logically from the contents of the paper, are significant and well supported by the data and analysis. The author got a 3 there, no comment required. The paper appropriately discusses the limitations of the study and offer useful implications for future research or practice. Okay, again, the evaluation was 3. But for example, let's say that there was a little trouble in the paper you're reviewing. An example of good feedback might be the results presented do not seem to directly answer the research questions. To improve clarity, you might want to revisit the analysis and explicitly address how each result relates to the specific research questions posed. This will help ensure the study's findings are aligned with the goals of the research. Okay, so maybe that was a 1 or a 2. All right, now let's take a look at this next section, remarks. So up above, we've got sections A through rationale, through G, significance of findings. Now here we're moving on to the specific, the actionable feedback, remarks with changes to be implemented or changes to be made. So in this section, we're going to ask you to please provide specific comments for the author in support of the review that you've completed above. And it's especially helpful for the author to make the best possible manuscript if you can provide direct examples from the paper and also include the section that requires any improvement or addition. So let's take a look here at the different examples of specific feedback. So here we've included the section number, the page of the paper, and the paragraph with a direct quote from the paper. So let's take a look at this. It's from page 1, paragraph 2. And there are multiple factors contributing to the higher test score levels observed in Japanese students, including differences midterm exams and finals. However, it's important to note that our study's findings differ from those reported in other institutions, and we intend to analyze why our students got different results in those 2 terms. Okay, so that's taken directly out of the paper that the reviewer was looking at. And the reviewer provides this actionable feedback. The author indicates in the paper that there are various, let's just change that to an in. Oh, it's a PDF. In the paper, that there are various reasons for why test score levels are higher. The author should spend additional time providing further rationale as to why their findings were different from those reported in other institutions. Okay, so that gives the author some actual actionable feedback that they can go back and work on. Okay, next, part B. So section B is originality. So if we take a look here, the paper explores the impact of virtual reality technology in enhancing engagement and learning outcomes in STEM education, which is current and pertinent to the academic community. Very interesting. So as we can see up above in B, the reviewer thought that the originality was excellent, 3. So we're actually congratulating the author here with a little bit of a motivational, very interesting. Okay, so please feel free to note anything that you feel the author has done very well. Okay, that's also allowable or actually encouraged. Also, I think that the copy that you've received of this feedback form may have only 5 lines or so. Okay. However, please, you're definitely going to have more actionable feedback than 5 lines. So feel free to add as many lines as required to include your feedback. Now, moving on, section C, clashing theoretical framework. So the authors, page 3, paragraph 4, wrote, the paper draws on both Krashen's input hypothesis and Vygotsky's sociocultural theory to explain language acquisition in STEM-focused ESL classrooms. However, while Krashen emphasizes the importance of comprehensible input in isolation, Vygotsky's model highlights social interaction as the critical element for learning. This leads to conflicting approaches. Okay, blah, blah, blah. It's a long quote. And the reviewer has given some feedback, actionable feedback. The author should choose one primary theoretical framework that best fits the research focus, making it the foundation of your argument. They could use the second framework as a supporting or comparative perspective, clearly indicating how it complements the main framework. This will help to avoid confusion and provide a cohesive structure to the research. If both frameworks are necessary, the author should briefly explain why, but ensure that one takes precedence to maintain clarity and coherence. Should the decision be made to retain both, the paper should be structured to discuss each framework in distinct sections, demonstrating how they apply to different aspects of the research. Okay, so that's some great feedback that is very actionable. Let's move on to section E. 1, there's only one study cited in the literature review section from which the whole conceptual framework was prepared. This study is mostly based on anecdotal evidence and lacks a strong foundation in the existing literature that needs to be reviewed. So the feedback here is the author should include other resources such as McKenzie 2022, Ehara 2018, and they've actually provided the author with a couple of studies that may assist in strengthening their research. Okay, next section, E2, comment number 2. These two references do not seem to be reliable as they're based on opinions rather than empirical research. And they've taken out the two references from the work that the author has provided and given feedback to address the concern about the reliability of the reference. The author should consider replacing the blog articles with peer-reviewed journal articles or studies from reputable academic sources. They need to look for empirical research on verb usage or language learning from established journals. And if the author cannot find direct replacements, they should consider removing these references altogether, as they're not considered rigorous sources. So it might, if you have enough time, it might even be recommended for you to go in and maybe just check on some of the references that the author has provided, just to confirm that, you know, they come from reputable sources, if you have time to do that. Moving on, F, there are some inconsistencies on two graphs based on the description in the results section. So let's take a look at the feedback here. The average seems to not match what is seen in the graph. And that is from page 8, paragraph 2. They've included a quote from the paper. And let's check out what the feedback is. The author should recheck the calculations for the averages and update either the graph or the narrative to ensure consistency between them. Adding a distinct line or marker representing the overall mean across groups for each assignment can help make the trends clearer. Additionally, labeling significant points or changes in the graph, such as gradual reduction in percentages, will improve clarity and align the graph with the described trends in the results. Okay, so very clear feedback. So, you know, moving on through the rest, we can see that all of this very clear feedback gives actionable, very highly actionable advice to the author. For example, in figure 3, the results show a general upward trend in student engagement, but no explanation is provided on what caused the spike in week 4, leaving the reader to guess at the underlying reasons. And we've included from the paper, page 9, paragraph 4, with our actionable advice. I'll let you read that. I'm going to take a little rest there. Okay, so if you want, you can pause here to read the advice. And here we've included another section, page 10, paragraph 5. In figure 5, the data shows a decline in test scores midway through the semester, which contrasts with the initial steady improvements seen in earlier weeks. Okay, so in figure 5, they should connect the observed decline in test scores with the teaching strategies implemented during that time. Was there a shift in instructional techniques, such as more focused on L2 over L1? Or were different assignments introduced? So the author should provide context to help explain how teaching methods may have contributed to the trends seen in the data. Now, finally, and again, if you have more comments to make, feel free to add as many lines as possible. The more, the better, okay, to help the author to improve their paper as much as possible. Now, comments to the editor. If there are any parts of the paper that maybe you don't feel confident reviewing, please feel free to leave a comment for us, for the editorial team. Okay, and here, for example, the checker wrote, I did not feel fully confident reviewing the statistical analysis section of the paper as it involved advanced techniques that are beyond my area of expertise. While I reviewed the overall interpretation of the data, I recommend having a specialist in statistical analysis review that section for accuracy. Okay, so that will be feedback very well taken. So please, please feel free to leave us feedback so that we can check the paper for anything that you might not feel 100% secure with. Okay, and I think that draws this to a close. So I would like to once again send out a great big thank you for all of the people working on the peer review, for your very valuable contributions to this process. And, again, by offering your expertise and your constructive feedback, you're helping to maintain the high standards of our journal and ensuring that the articles published are of practical and academic benefit for educators, not only here in Japan, but all over the world. So remember, cross-check your comments with the rubric that we took a look at. Whoopsie. Well, with the rubric that I showed you earlier, and then cross-check it so that your comments are clear, specific, and actionable to help out the authors as very much as possible. Okay, so signing off from the PanSIG Journal editorial team. Good luck and thank you so much.